Order, please. Order, please. Before we begin the day routine, the subject for this evening's light debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Halifax-Shabukdale. Be resolved, the government should immediately end the practice of impoverishing seniors by making them pay for health care in nursing homes. Be debated this evening at 6 p.m. Begin the day routine presenting reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports. Order, please. There's a request to revert back to reading petitions. Agreed? Agreed. Reading petitions. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do apologize. I beg leave to table a petition, Mr. Speaker, with 26 signatures, and it's therefore be it resolved that we, the undersigned family members, councillors, and other concerned persons, call the Ham government to show that it cares about the residents of regional residential services by giving that agency a mandate and appropriate funding to negotiate wage parity for their residential councillors as soon as possible. And Mr. Speaker, I have affixed my signature. And once again, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This is tabled. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to table the surplus Crown property disposal report.
Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I'm always appreciative of any occasions when the honourable members assist. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to table the surplus Crown disposal report for the period April 1, 2002 to March 31, 2003. Mr. Speaker, the information contained in this report may not make page news. It may not appear at the top of the television news tonight. However, Mr. Speaker, this report is brimming with 175 small positive stories. It contains a year's worth of contributions to deserving community groups, volunteers, and nonprofit organizations across the province. This report also provides support to public safety in the province with the delivery of surplus VHF radios to volunteer firefighters, ground search and rescue crews, and municipal EMO coordinators. It also represents thousands of computer items, more than 4,000 computers, monitors, laptops, and keyboards for schools across the province, part of the government's Computers for School program. Mr. Speaker, this disposal also represents an opportunity to sell surplus items through auctions, the real estate market, and public tender. Sales of those items resulted in proceeds of $2.3 million, money that will go towards the provincial debt. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to remind members that nonprofit agencies within their constituencies can always apply for surplus items. We are happy to assist where possible. These groups can contact the Department of Transportation and Public Works, and we would be happy to consider all applications, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for providing a statement in advance. I also would like him in future to provide a copy of this bedtime reading, which would make wonderful reading, particularly of the communities that have the chance to apply. From personal experience, I want you to know that the Department of Transportation and Public Works officials that are in charge of this very worthwhile program do an excellent job. They are extremely attentive to getting back to requests, and in particular when community groups are directed towards them, there's a process in place that is well received by the community groups and nonprofit organizations that I have directed to them. I'd like to have the Minister pass on that gratitude to that members of your staff. I look forward to continuing to work with them, and thank you for your assistance.
Now, member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too would like to echo many of the comments with regards to the rather professional and courteous service that is afforded by the staff over at Transportation and Public Works. What we're seeing here today is obviously the product of the successful individuals, but we're not seeing all those that applied in one way or the other and have not been successful. So it's very difficult at this point to judge the complete success of the program. For example, Mr. Speaker, I recall a year ago I sent a letter to the minister's predecessor, who's his seatmate, with regards to a volunteer fire department in my constituency, and to see if they could pick up a used vehicle for their fire department, and nothing was made available at that time. But yet I see there are some other successful individuals in this process that came after the fact, so I'm not sure if that's coincidence or what. I noticed that the hospital lands there in Sydney went for $80,000, but they were purchased for $1 million, so I'm not sure of the merits of that project, although the optics at first glance would seem to suggest that the government didn't get a great deal there. Other than that, Mr. Speaker, we'll have to reserve for further comment until we do a complete analysis of this report. Thank you.
Any further statements by ministers? Government notice of motion. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
On behalf of my colleague, the Minister of Health, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas tomorrow, Friday, May 9, 2003, is recognized as Licensed Practical Nurses Day, whereas more than 3,000 LPNs provide a valuable and essential role in caring for Nova Scotians when in hospital, nursing homes, and in the community, whereas Nova Scotia's LPNs have taken advantage of many opportunities for retraining and professional development available through the government's nursing strategy to enhance their contribution to our healthcare system. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me today in recognizing and applauding the dedication of the 3,000 licensed practical nurses who care for Nova Scotians 365 days each year. And, Mr. Speaker, I request a waiver of notice.
Mr. Wavers, it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 2001, the Emergency Measures Organization unveiled its Wall of Honor, which recognizes contributions to community disaster readiness in Nova Scotia, and it recently added the Red Cross and the Canadian Coast Guard Auxiliary. And whereas the Red Cross, staffed mainly by volunteers, is an essential tool in disaster relief and assistance, providing emergency food, clothing, shelter, registration, and personal services to those in need, earning them a humanitarian reputation. And whereas celebrating its Silver Jubilee this year, the Canadian Coast Guard Auxiliary, comprised of 750 volunteers and 445 vessels, also received the EMO honor for years of service patrolling the hundreds of kilometers of maritime coastline. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the Red Cross and the Canadian Coast Guard Auxiliary on being added to the Emergency Measures Organization Wall of Honor and wish them continued success in their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas World Red Cross Red Crescent Day 2003 is marked this year with the launch of Phase 2 of the Truth About AIDS Anti-Stigma campaign, which was launched this day last year, and whereas the Red Cross is continuing on the theme of fighting HIV/AIDS-related stigma and discrimination, incorporating a series of designs on stamps developed to counter misconceptions about HIV/AIDS transmission, and whereas the stamps are using simple messages such as, you cannot get AIDS by being a friend, you cannot get AIDS by holding hands, and you cannot get AIDS by talking to someone. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate the volunteers and staff worldwide of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies for their campaign and for the Society's noble idea, and I ask for waiver of notice.
Question for waivers, it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
On behalf of my colleague, the Minister of Health, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a nurse practitioner is a professional who works with doctors to give people a full range of care, from hands-on to counseling to education. And whereas people in communities turn to their doctors, nurse practitioners, pharmacists, and others for information, advice, care, and referral. Whereas enhancing a broad range of services is an important step in improving the overall health of Nova Scotians. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House commend the South Shore District Health Authority for recruiting one such professional, nurse practitioner, Renee Bennett. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
For waivers that agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The honourable member Kings North.
Could I do an introduction before I introduce the bill?
Yes.
I'd like to, in the East Gallery, I'd like to introduce Doug and Dawn Caldwell. Doug and Dawn are neighbors of mine, famous for raising duck trollers, has written a book. I'll ask them to stand on duck trollers. They've also were the teachers for Robert Chisholm. He taught Robert and for many years supported Robert politically, but I've wooed them over. Doug and Don are here to present they presented a tape to Michelle Mackenzie, the Deputy Minister of Tourism and Culture, of a song he just wrote, Back Home to Nova Scotia. And Doug was the winner of the 1995 Centennial Celebration Teachers Union contest for his song, Minds in Motion. So if you could give them a warm welcome, I'd appreciate it. I should mention, if you didn't hear, that I have won them over from the other side.
Order, please. Honourable member Kings North on his resolution.
I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 76 of the Acts of 1860, an act to incorporate the Associated Alumni of Acadia College.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 76 of the Acts of 1860, an act to incorporate the Associated Alumni of Acadia College.
Bill number 47, an act to amend Chapter 76 of the Acts of 1860, an act to incorporate the Associated Alumni of Acadia College.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. The honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 72 of the Acts of 1897, the Lunenburg Common Lands Act.
The honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 72 of the Acts of 1897, the Lunenburg Commons Lands Act.
Bill number 48, an act to amend Chapter 72 of the Acts of 1897, the Lunenburg Common Lands Act.
Or this bill be read a second time at a future date. The honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 32 of the Acts of 2002, an act to amend Chapter 140 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Elections Act.
The honourable Leader of the Official Opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to amend Chapter 32 of the Acts of 2002, an act to amend Chapter 140 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Elections Act.
Bill number 49, an act to amend Chapter 32 of the Acts of 2002, an act to amend Chapter 140 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Elections Act.
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. Notice of motion. The honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Environment and Labour, who is responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates, mused yesterday that Nova Scotians would not like a publicly owned system of auto insurance like that of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or British Columbia. Whereas the minister was quoted as saying, "Can you imagine, really, having civil servants look after your insurance right now?" Which shows a real appreciation for the hard-working public sector employees of this province, like firemen, police officers, and paramedics. And whereas the minister has ascribed lower insurance rates in Manitoba to being a flatter province, and then contradicted himself yesterday when he opined that Anecdotal evidence had convinced him that auto insurance rates in Nova Scotia were actually lower than in Manitoba. Therefore, be it resolved that the Minister of skyrocketing insurance rates assess his own willingness to deal with the insurance side of his portfolio rather than slight Nova Scotia's public civil service as incapable of running a publicly owned insurance company. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Community Services still refuses to admit that he plays a crucial role in ensuring that the employer and the workers of RRSS settled the strike. And whereas every day for almost 4 weeks now, the hourly wage being paid to replacement staff is just slightly less than what would have been paid out to 2 RRSS workers, and whereas the Minister of Community Services is ultimately responsible for the safety and well-being of our most vulnerable citizens who have all but been ignored in this government's cruel game, therefore it be resolved that the Minister of Community Services resolve the strike by treating RRSS workers like the professionals they are by offering the same opportunity for labour negotiations that have been offered to other professionals in this province. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Request for waiver, here no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas reaching your centennial birthday is an event only a few of us are fortunate to experience, and whereas Shelburne County resident Mrs. Gladys Bauer is celebrating an even more significant milestone today, and whereas on this day the Upper Ohio resident turns 105 years of age. Therefore, it be resolved that the members of this House join me in wishing Mrs. Gladys Bauer a very happy birthday and wish her many more happy years ahead. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Environment and Labour, who is responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates, stated yesterday that auto insurance rates in most cases lower here than they are in Manitoba, which has a publicly owned auto system. And whereas the minister admitted his claim was based on 3 pieces of anecdotal information rather than upon any close scrutiny of the Manitoba system, which would have revealed the minister had no idea what he was talking about. And whereas the minister should take the time to get his facts straight by visiting Manitoba Public Insurance website at www.mpi.mp.ca/IRC/intro.asap. Therefore, be it resolved that this House urge the Minister of Environment and Labour, the champion of skyrocketing insurance rates, to study the publicly owned insurance system in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, so he will make no more ill-informed comments on their characteristics. I seek waiver.
Request for waiver. Heard a no. Notice tabled. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the NDP on auto insurance simply state that they want to copy the Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia public plans here in Nova Scotia without any reconsideration or examination, and whereas when the Schreier government in Manitoba implemented such a plan in their first term in office, they had to borrow $350 million to fund it, and whereas when the Schreier government incurred substantial public unrest by its move, the legislature in Winnipeg was picketed and shut down by a large number of concerned citizens. Resolved that how the Schreier government implemented public auto insurance in Manitoba should be told, rather than oversimplified assurances that, yes, whatever was done there will be done here, without any details of consequences.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice and on a future. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice and on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Governor General's Caring Canadian Award is presented to individuals and groups who provide extraordinary help or care to people in the community through the selfless giving of their time and energy. And whereas Gordon Skanes of Middleton has been awarded for his volunteer efforts on behalf of the 12 Baskets Food Bank. And whereas Having led the planning and construction for the food bank facilities in 1995, Mr. Skanes, both manager and food purchaser for the food bank, has also put in thousands of hours each year transporting food and has come to be known in his community as Mr. Food Bank. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House congratulate Mr. Gordon Skanes on receiving the Governor General's Caring Canadian Award and applaud his generous efforts on behalf of the 12 Baskets Food Bank. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Reverend Sandy McDonald has faithfully served St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Dartmouth for 35 years, and whereas he has provided leadership and counsel to his congregation and the entire area as president of the Dartmouth Community Concerts Association, board member of the Dartmouth Sportsplex, as well as volunteering as a police chaplain and advisor with the Camp Geddes for Kids. And whereas on June the 1st, Reverend D.A.P. Sandy McDonald will be sworn in as a national moderator for the Presbyterian Church. Therefore be it resolved that the members of the House, therefore be it resolved that members of this House congratulate Reverend Sandy McDonald on this esteemed honor and wish him continued success and best wishes in his new capacity as moderator of the Presbyterian Church of Canada. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas last year the provincial government introduced a paint recycling program that has a no charge back to the consumer, and whereas that the definition of this government as no charge back to the consumer is to have a 50-cent to $1 charge on every can of paint that is sold in the province. And whereas the cost of recycling paint to private depots has dramatically increased their insurance rates, much to the effect that many private depots do not carry liability insurance. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize when this government introduces a new program with no charge to the consumer, what they really are saying to the consumers is that they will have to pay more through hidden taxes, and private businesses will be offered no compensation for providing this most vital service.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, where Sheffield Mills residents Dean and Jean Henniger celebrated 65 rich and fulfilling years of marriage this year. And whereas Mr. Henniger is a well-known apple grower and pioneer in containerized shipping, and Mrs. Henniger has been actively involved in improving her community. And whereas having raised 5 children, the couple knows the value of a good education, as evidenced by Mr. Henniger's service as a governor of Acadia University and as a school trustee in South Berwick and Canning. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating Dean and Jean Henniger on their 65th wedding anniversary, thank them for their contributions to the community, and wish them many more happy years in the future. I request waiver.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Shabukto.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas one middle-aged Halifax Shabukto resident with no accidents and only 1 speeding ticket in the last 10 years compared rates with Manitoba as the government has urged. And whereas the Manitoba rate without good driving discounts is $773 a year for collision and third-party liability. And whereas the Nova Scotia rate for the same driver and car is $2,232 for third-party liability only, a $500 deductible and $2 million liability in both cases. Therefore, be it resolved that the Minister of Environment and Labour, who is responsible for skyrocketing insurance, and other members of the Flat Road Society should wake up and use the rate calculator instead of acting like cheerleaders for the private insurance companies. Thank you.
Agreed.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Education last week rose in this House and spoke on the issue of technology as if he knew what he was talking about. And whereas after reading a recent story that appeared in the Dal Gazette, it was confirmed that the minister had no idea what he was talking about or even what technology is. And whereas in response to the question, what is technology, the minister stated, and I quote, computer essentially, the operations of computers and the capacity of computers and, people. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House strongly encourage the Minister of Education to consult with his department or even a dictionary so that he can jump into the 21st century like the technologically wise students he's supposed to represent. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
We hear several noes. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas veteran Canadian press writer Tom McDougall died earlier this week, and whereas Tom, upon his retirement from Canadian press, became an active freelance writer and was an instrumental force in the preparation and writing of a report following province-wide hearings by the Legislature's Select Committee on Fire Safety, and whereas Tom was an ardent community volunteer in everything from Boy Scouts to the local Lions Club, therefore be it resolved, MLAs in the House of Assembly offer our sincere sympathies to Tom's wife, Sheila, their two sons, Scott and Jack, knowing that many wonderful memories of Tom will prevail. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Ham government is becoming a perennial front-runner for the Canadian Association of Journalists Code of Silence Award, whereas the association has nominated the Ham government for this notorious award because it instituted the highest fees in Canada for information requests and for denying information on why the Cabinet cut certain programs, a decision overturned by the courts. Whereas his tight-lipped Tory stance drew rave reviews from the journalists in 2001 as well, so it appears that the Hamites intend to live by the rule that tight Tory lips will never sink the ship of their government. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate the Ham government on yet another nomination for the Canadian Association of Journalists Code of Silence Award with best wishes for victory. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
For waiver. Hear several noes. The notice is tabled. The honourable member for Richmond.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the federal government has contributed $29,487 to the Children's Rights Centre of the University College of Cape Breton. Whereas this money will help finance the reprint and translation of the Centre's grade 6 and 8 curricula on the Convention of the Rights of the Child, as requested by a number of French language and French immersion schools. Whereas making these educational materials available on the Children's Rights Centre website ensures their availability to all Canadians across the country. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the Children's Rights Centre at UCCB for obtaining the federal government funding to translate their curriculum for French language and French immersion schools to use. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my colleague, the MLA for Halifax Citadel, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the University of King's College has searched for over a year for its 22nd president and is finally founded in former Memorial University English Department head William Barker. Whereas Mr. Barker holds a doctorate in early modern English text from the University of Toronto and is a distinguished scholar, educator, and university administrator. Whereas King's is one of the smallest universities in North America and is well known for its journalism school and multidisciplinary programs like Foundation Year. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this legislature join me in welcoming William Barker to Nova Scotia and congratulate him on his recent appointment to the role of President of the University of King's College. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my colleague from Halifax Needham, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Feminists for Just and Equitable Public Policy is a coalition of equality-seeking, community-based organizations working on public policy, and whereas this coalition works to put women's issues on the agendas of all political parties in Nova Scotia, and whereas on Thursday, May 8th, the Feminists for Just and Equitable Public Policy will release to all political parties a document outlining 16 key areas of concern to women and their families. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the Feminists for Just and Equitable Public Policy for their efforts on behalf of all women, and to commit to ensuring today's recommendations by the group are considered when their respective parties draw up their election platforms. And Mr. Speaker, I'd request waiver and passage without debate.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas implementation of public auto insurance was not only done by the Schreier government in Manitoba, but was also carried out by the NDP government of Dave Barrett in British Columbia. And whereas the NDP government of Dave Barrett lasted only one term from 1972 to... Mr. Speaker, if I could speak over the hubbub...
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
This is Clause 2. Whereas the NDP government of Dave Barrett only lasted one term from 1972 to 1975, at the end of which they were replaced by the Social Credit Party led by Bill Bennett. And whereas at the end of the single term of Barrett's government in BC, the province was in a state of chaos as a result of strikes in the public service that brought delivery of the public auto insurance to a halt. Resolved that when the NDP says they intend to do the same thing here as Barrett did in BC, we should get the whole picture to know what that means, rather than being lulled to sleep by platitudinous NDP platitudes which avoid all historical details.
Notice is tabled. The honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jason Smith was named 2002 Outstanding Male Athlete 15 years and under at the Truro Sport Heritage Society 19th Annual Sports Award Dinner. Whereas Jason Smith was a key member of the Truro Blue Bombers Pee Wee football team that captured the provincial and maritime championships in 2002, a member of the Nova Scotia Schooners provincial football team that earned a maritime title, and also a member of the Bible Hill Huskies boys volleyball team that went undefeated last year, winning district and regional crowns. Whereas in addition to these accomplishments, Jason Smith is a natural leader with a high level of maturity, despite being the youngest member on many of the teams in which he played. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Jason Smith on being named 2002 Outstanding Male Athlete 15 years and under by the Truro Sport Heritage Society, and wish him continued success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Countermanded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable Minister of Natural Resources on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank all members of the House for allowing me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, we have in the East Gallery this afternoon members of the grade 12 political science class from Dartmouth High. And Mr. Speaker, they are accompanied by Don Houle, their teacher. And Mr. Speaker, many members of this House, all sides of this House, have had the opportunity over a number of years to participate in the model parliament, including the honourable member from Dartmouth North, to participate in a very successful model parliament that goes on every year at Dartmouth High. And I must say there's continued to be a very active group of students interested in the political goings-on in the province, and I would hope that some of the people that are sitting up in the gallery today will someday take our place down here on all sides of the House to carry on the democratic process that we have in Nova Scotia and in Canada. And having said that, I'm very pleased to bring this to the attention of all members of the House and ask them to show their warm welcome to these students.
Certainly welcome our special guests to the gallery today, and I hope they enjoy the proceedings if they can hear it. Order, please. Now, member Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Sisters of Charity have had a long and distinguished relationship with the province of Nova Scotia, and whereas that beneficial connection has never been more evident than in New Waterford, and in particular in the St. Agnes school system. And whereas this week, Sister Louise Bray of the Sisters of Charity and a long-time beloved teacher at St. Agnes celebrates her 50th Jubilee of religious profession. Therefore, be it resolved that this House send best wishes to Sister Louise Bray of the Sisters of Charity on her 50th Jubilee of religious profession, and thank her for her service to the province of Nova Scotia. I seek waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Ham government's pattern of secrecy has been nominated for the Canadian Association of Journalists Code of Silence Award. And whereas the Ham government has the highest fees in the country for freedom of information inquiries. And whereas the winner of this dubious honour will be given the award May 24th. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate the Ham government on its nomination and make sure we watch the results on the 24th, because this government won't tell anybody anything. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
For waiver, here no. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Festival of Knowledge offered visitors the opportunity to experience the Flavors Festival, the Philosopher's Corner, the Lighthouse Publishing Super Word Challenge, the O'Regan South Shore Mental Math Competition, and the CKBW World Trivia Challenge, along with many exhibitions. And whereas many volunteers were responsible for making the event and competition a success and for making learning fun, therefore be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the organizers, volunteers, and competitors of the Festival of Knowledge on a job well done. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the University of King's College will honour newspaper publisher Graham W. Dennis at its convocation ceremonies on May 15th, and whereas since 1954 Mr. Dennis has been publisher of the Chronicle Herald and the Mail Star, the largest independently owned and operated newspaper in Canada, and whereas Mr. Dennis is a member of the Order of Canada who's been a strong and generous supporter of many charities, including the IWK Health Centre, Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, therefore be it resolved that members of this House join me in congratulating Graham Dennis on the well-earned recognition he will receive at the University of King's College convocation, and wish him well in all his endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
There's a question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Clare.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Lisette Comeau and Diane Boudreau participated in the provincial badminton tournament in Sydney on April 26th, and whereas Lisette and Diane were representing l'École Secondaire de Clare at this provincial competition, and whereas Lisette and Diane won the provincial badminton championship in the girls' double junior division, therefore be resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Lisette Comeau and Diane Boudreau on capturing the provincial badminton championship in their division, and wish them continued success and best wishes in all their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver, please.
Request for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Speaker, I hereby give notice in the future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May is Multiple Sclerosis Awareness Month, and whereas MS is a common disease of the central nervous system, and whereas on Wednesday, May the 7th, 2003, Robert Hammer, along with his friends Rami Hassan, Gordon Sims, Paul Forrest, Craig Madden, and Ken McKellar, all students of Prince Andrew High School, raised $1,300 for MS research by shaving their heads. Therefore, be resolved that members of this House congratulate Robert Hammer, Rami Hassan, Gordon Sims, Paul Forrest, Craig Madden, and Ken McKellar for supporting the research of MS, and wish all of them the best in their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day go over questions put by members. Question period begin at 12:43 and end at 1:43. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Labour, who also happens to be responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the minister told Nova Scotians that his legislation will give government the power to stop insurance company abuses. And people, frankly, may be making important decisions on the basis of the minister's statements. My question is this: why has the minister who allows skyrocketing insurance rates created the impression that Cabinet will gain the power to deal with abuses like rates that are set on the basis of age?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member asked a question that's been asked, I suppose, about 20 times by the same member, and the answer is simply this: we have regulatory powers which we intend to exercise.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, if the minister is going to make statements about bills, he ought to really read them. The minister has been making it up, frankly, as he goes along, but someone in his department must have told him that his legislation gives the government very, very limited powers. Cabinet will gain no power to regulate rates, no power to deal with rating categories, no power to deal with discriminatory rates. Any driver who relies on the minister's statements is sadly mistaken. Mr. Speaker, will the minister explain why the government is seeking only the power for Cabinet to require insurance coverage, but no regulatory power over the cost of insurance?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member opposite is a lawyer. He also used to be a litigation lawyer, and I presume maybe he still is. Those people, of course, we're told by some responsible for the higher cost of insurance. Mr. Speaker, the regulatory power that we have will be encompassed in regulations which will be going to Cabinet for approval, and Mr. Speaker, they will cover such things as age, etc.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister is sadly mistaken, and his mistakes are misleading Nova Scotia drivers. In explaining his proposed regulations, he shared our concern that senior citizens are being discriminated in the rating of their insurance policies by insurance companies in this province, Mr. Speaker, and you can check page 2306 of Hansard. How can the minister say that he is so concerned about discrimination against seniors when he is not seeking the regulatory powers to deal with the cost of discrimination?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know where common sense went to, but we have an act in the House at the present time that will give this government the power to make regulations, and they are just, Mr. Speaker, they are just wasting the time of the House playing around with that bill when the only thing that in the bill that is debatable is the principle of the bill. Pass the bill, then we'll give you the regulations.
The Honourable Member for Clare.
I think Ron knows that what you're saying, Darrell, is correct, but he doesn't want to admit the oops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Environment and Labour and Minister responsible for insurance. Mr. Speaker,
welcome aboard.
Mr. Speaker, it appears that the insurance industry has found a way to get around the recent rate freeze. Given that 4 of the largest insurance companies operating in Nova Scotia are holding off on renewing business or writing any new business. Mr. Speaker, Economical, Royal, Sun Alliance, CGU, and Inc. have served notice on their agents and are not to renew or write new business until they know what the government's decision on insurance means. The effect of this decision will have a drastic effect on Nova Scotia drivers, since many of them have to go to the insurer of last resort, where their premiums will be substantially higher. And my first question to the minister is, will the minister explain to this House what measures he has in place to ensure that more Nova Scotian drivers won't be forced to use the insurer of last resort for their insurance?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know where the honourable member got his information from, but however, I have not been informed, and my office has not been informed of the facts which he has presented to the House. And Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to him that we will we will react when a situation such as that actually is on our doorsteps.
The honourable member for Clare on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these insurance companies write a bulk of auto insurance business in Nova Scotia, and for them to indicate that they won't write new business or renew business will have dire effects for drivers. Mr. Speaker, we've heard all kinds of stories where drivers who were once paying $1,000 per year for insurance are now paying $3,000 or more for insurance once they're forced to seek insurance from the insurer of last resort. But the turmoil may be worse for other drivers on the road if more Nova Scotians decide to drive without insurance. In fact, over 2,700 drivers were fined for driving without insurance over the past year alone. My question to the minister is, can the minister explain what he will be doing over the next few days to ensure that these large insurance companies don't leave Nova Scotians in vulnerable, difficult positions when it comes time to get insurance or renew their insurance?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Speaker, I'm not going to answer a hypothetical question.
The Honourable Member Clare on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister stated that he hoped that the insurance companies operating in Nova Scotia won't attempt an end run around the government's recent legislation freezing rates. But if they did, he would take action. Given the decision by these major insurance companies, an immediate question that comes to mind is whether these insurance companies may decide to stop writing business in Nova Scotia altogether. Mr. Speaker, should that happen, we cannot automatically assume that Nova Scotia's other insurance companies will be able to pick up where the large insurance companies leave off. My final question to the minister, since the freeze may be having the opposite intended effect from what the minister wanted, what further guarantees can the minister give Nova Scotian drivers that their rates won't increase any more than they have already have over the last year?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the honourable member to table this piece of fiction in the House.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question also is directed to the minister responsible for insurance, which is skyrocketing. The minister has completely confused Nova Scotians with his misinformation and apparent lack of understanding of auto insurance. He introduced a bill to capture the latest round of increases, but the bill leaves the door open for raises by other means, and it doesn't even capture all the most recent increases. For example, in the past 2 months alone, Citadel and cooperators have filed rate increases averaging 14%, and those rate increases are now in effect. My question to the minister is simple. How could you have missed this?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we captured, I believe it was 13 insurance companies that had applied for rate increases that would have affected probably thousands of Nova Scotians' auto insurance premiums.
Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview and your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister just doesn't seem to get it. Citadel and cooperators are among the biggest insurance companies in the province, and yet this minister has left them off the hook. This oversight will cost thousands of Nova Scotians thousands and thousands of dollars. So Nova Scotians are left only to shake their heads at the minister's apparent lack of understanding of what's really happening out there. So my question for the minister responsible for insurance, which is skyrocketing, is why don't you bring forward legislation that captures these raises by Citadel and cooperators, these increases that came into effect just weeks before the minister's May 1st deadline?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have the list of the 13 companies here, so I don't know if those two companies are on that particular list. But if they're not on that list, Mr. Speaker, then I would suggest to you they had their premium increases in place before May the 1st.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview and your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the calls have already started coming into my constituency office from people who are saying, I thought there was a freeze, and I have to break the bad news to them that the freeze doesn't apply to their situation. So the minister says that he wanted to stop rate increases made on the eve of the UARB decision, but the fact is that his deadline misses one by just 6 weeks and another by 2 weeks. My question to the minister, again, is simple. Was this oversight deliberate or was it accidental?
Order, please. I think the honourable member is imputing a motive upon the minister. He is. Order, please. Next question. Oh, yes. The honourable member of Cape Breton South.
What motive? He asked how it was happened. I never thought we'd get a hometown. Mr. Speaker, my question.
Order, please.
Today,
The honourable member for Cobblegood have a comment to make. Rise in his place. The microphone and make it. The honourable member of Cape Breton South has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Premier told Nova Scotians that his government is going to take a half step to bring Nova Scotia in line with every other province in Canada. Mr. Speaker, this in a province where on Sunday you can lose your shirt in a casino, but you can't buy one in a store. Mr. Speaker, the Premier announced that the Tory government is going to attach a plebiscite to the next municipal elections. But, Mr. Speaker, in HRM, where support for Sunday shopping is greatest, there was only a 37% voter turnout at the polls. In rural areas, where support for Sunday shopping isn't as strong, municipal voter turnout is higher. Mr. Speaker, across the province, more people vote in provincial elections than municipal elections. So my question to the Premier is attaching the plebiscite, Mr. Premier, to the municipal election, is this your attempt to control the result of the plebiscite in your favour?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the question from the good member from Cape Breton. This is, as I have learned with a discussion with many thousands of Nova Scotians over the past year, an item that is of great interest. A very, very high percentage of Nova Scotians have a strong position on this particular subject. Unfortunately, there isn't a real consensus among all of those opinions. And what we will achieve by way of a trial period before Christmas, and what we will achieve with a plebiscite during the time of the municipal elections in 2004 is an opportunity for Nova Scotians to examine this in great depth and detail so that when the decision is made, it will be the right decision.
Honourable member Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the Premier talks about consensus and states many times it's all about choices. Well, here are some of the government choices, Mr. Speaker. In October 2000, Sunday shopping would not be a step forward, but a step backward, Premier Ham. November 2000, Tories' Red Tape Task Force recommends that the government repeal the Retail Uniform Closing Act. March 2000, Michael Baker declares Sunday shopping closed issue until 2005. January 2002, Minister Fage responds to concerns of Amherst business by calling on Cabinet to review the Tory position. And in April 2002, Minister Rodney MacDonald confirms that the Tories will not revisit the Sunday shopping issue until 2005. My first supplementary to the Premier is, if the Premier thinks providing Sunday shopping is about listening, why isn't he listening to the choices of Nova Scotians?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the question is humorous in that I had just related to the minister, or to the member opposite, that I have been listening to Nova Scotians for a year on this issue. And Nova Scotians have very definite views on this issue. Nova Scotians think that this is a very important issue and they want a choice. All Nova Scotians deserve a choice, not just the choice of that caucus.
The Honourable member Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing numerous here is the flip-flops of the Premier and his ministers over the past couple of years. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has said he has conducted his polling and listened to Nova Scotians. Just yesterday, the Premier said, having heard from thousands of Nova Scotians and many interest groups, I believe it's time to put it to a vote, to give consumers and business people across the province the opportunity to register their choice. My question to the Premier, why then won't you, Mr. Premier, do what's fair and attach the plebiscite to the provincial election instead of waiting 17 months for a municipal election.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I look back at the situation 10 years ago when there was a trial period before Christmas. And lo and behold, to the surprise of many, after the trial period, the government of the day, of which that particular member opposite was an adherent, the government decided that it wasn't nearly so good as it appeared. I think we need another trial period. Nova Scotians deserve another trial period, and Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians, each and every one of them, deserve a choice.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable Member Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday outside the doors of this legislature, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Premier made a statement about public service that I hope all members on the opposite side regret. This minister rekindled the old Tory attack on public sector workers when he raised the question of whether they could manage auto insurance, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask this minister of why is he belittling our teachers, our healthcare workers, and all of our hard-working people that work in the public sector in this province just to hide his ignorance around auto insurance.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I have on many, many occasions spoken to public servants at long service award ceremonies, etc. And I like to repeat a story, but it's much too long to do in question period, as to why I consider the Nova Scotia civil service to be the finest in the world, Mr. Speaker, not just in Canada, but in the world. And I'll give my remarks to the honourable member as to why I say that, but I'll do that privately. But, Mr. Speaker, if indeed my remarks were taken in a derogatory fashion, I apologize, because it was not the intent. It was simply that I thought it was ridiculous for the government to be in the insurance business.
Now, Member Cape Breton Centre, on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what people heard or saw on the electronic media or read in their newspapers, Mr. Speaker. It was a troubled minister lashing out at anything he can to try to get himself out of the auto insurance mess, Mr. Speaker. This Deputy Premier, as we all know, represents the government when he implies the public servants are not capable. He is simply voicing what every Nova Scotian learned when they watched this government's treatment of paramedics, Bill 68, and now its treatment or lack of involvement in the RRSS strike, Mr. Speaker. So I want to ask the Premier, why does your government hold our public service in such contempt?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are blessed with devoted public sector workers in this province. This government respects the efforts they make on behalf of all citizens, and I'm very surprised that the member opposite would come forward with a question that would suggest otherwise.
Now, Member Cape Breton Centre, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the facts speak for themselves. This government has attacked public sector employees as its predecessor government, the Liberals, did, Mr. Speaker. You could watch again the Premier's actions during the paramedic strike, Bill 68, and the one that's going on outside these doors now, Mr. Speaker. Or you can listen to the very words yesterday of the Deputy Premier, Mr. Speaker. Any way you look at it, this government constantly attacks public sector employees. So my question back to the minister is, how can you assure Nova Scotians that they can expect lower and fairer auto insurance rates by attacking our hard-working and loyal public sector employees?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Well, that's quite a stretch, Mr. Speaker. I have already informed the honourable member of my respect for the civil servants of this province. Mr. Speaker, insofar as the insurance is concerned, however, I do not believe that government should be in the business of competing with the private sector. So, Mr. Speaker, we are not looking at a government-run insurance scheme at this time.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we're hearing some very surprising things today because the minister talks about not competing with the private sector. The Minister of Environment and Labour, who's responsible for the skyrocketing insurance rates, made his pitch to Nova Scotians yesterday and said they should swallow some of the highest and most unfair auto insurance rates in Canada. He asked, as my colleague pointed out, whether or not they wanted public servants to run their insurance. So I'd like to ask the Premier this question. Will the Premier explain why, if it is his government's policy that Nova Scotians should not rely on public servants, why is it that his government awarded the natural gas distribution franchise to Sask Energy, a Crown corporation run by public servants?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it is certainly the philosophy of this government that we should do those things that governments are elected to do. We should be there to provide essential services to the people of Nova Scotia, such things as health care and education. It is not within the realm of the philosophy of this particular government that we will be in business, because time after time after time it has been demonstrated in Nova Scotia, as it has been demonstrated right across Canada, that government does not do a good job in providing those kinds of things that businesses are in the business of doing.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Sask Energy makes a profit every year, which it returns to the taxpayers of Saskatchewan. And when distribution is finally put in place in this province, part of that province will come from the people of Nova Scotia to the people of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has consistently expressed his surprise and amazement at the auto insurance situation, surprised that rates are so high, surprised they keep going higher, surprised that the public insurers discriminate, surprised that so many drivers now go uninsured. The remarks made yesterday by the minister in charge of skyrocketing insurance rates were more surprising. So my question is this. The Premier refused to attend this week's NSGEU convention. Is that because the government does not believe that public servants should run anything, including health care?
The Honourable the Premier.
The member opposite, Mr. Speaker, as I reply to his question, would do well to be reminded that this government does respect workers in the public sector. We didn't roll back wages. We didn't freeze wages. We didn't ask them to take wage-free holidays. We respect the public sector. But we are limited. We are limited in the resources that we have, and we are limited in how far we can go in wage negotiations. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, this government will continue to respect those in the public sector within the resources that are available to them.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this government introduced the most draconian piece of legislation in this province's history, and maybe in the history of this country, in Bill 68, that took away collective bargaining from public sector workers in this province. And Mr. Speaker, no matter what the Premier says, the record speaks otherwise. Mr. Speaker, desperate governments say desperate things. The minister who has let insurance rates skyrocket for the past 2 years was pretty desperate when he used the civil servant line after his own government has to rely on Sask Energy to try and get our own natural gas into our own homes. Will the Premier explain why his government will say anything to try and get Nova Scotia drivers to accept unacceptable auto insurance rates in this province?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the challenges in government is to balance the views of the two opposition parties, because the Liberal Party is suggesting that Nova Scotians are going to be denied insurance because of what the government has done. And the New Democratic Party is suggesting that we haven't done enough. In fact, we're simply allowing the insurance companies to continue to raise rates at an unacceptable level. Mr. Speaker, I know about insurance rates because I got my bill the same as other Nova Scotians, and my bill was up. And we are in the process of rationalizing an approach that will continue to allow Nova Scotians to receive insurance during this transition period, and at the same time work towards a resolution that will allow Nova Scotians to be provided with the appropriate insurance at the appropriate cost.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Education. Earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians were concerned when the minister released his report card to parents. And that report showed that our grade 8 students received an average mark of 32% in their math assessments, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal caucus recently discovered that a companion study to that 2002 math report was released on April 30th of this year by the Council of Ministers of Education. The report provides some important information about what influences children's learning in math. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is, given the need to do more to help our students improve their performance, can the Minister advise this House whether this report has been made widely available to school boards, parents and teachers?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can let the honourable member know that if it has not been made available, it will be, and it should be in the process of being made available if it is not already there.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the report released by the Council of Ministers of Education presents the results from student, teachers and school questionnaires that were designed to enhance achievement by providing more comprehensive information on the context of math learning. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not surprised that the Minister did not draw attention to this report because it continues to raise questions, unfortunately, about our performance. And it's also interesting to note that only 50% of Nova Scotia schools report some or a lot of influence from external tests and examinations or standards on school activities and programs. So, Mr. Speaker, my next question for the Minister is, what assurances can the Minister give Nova Scotia's parents and students that this report will be taken out of his desk drawer and used for its intended purpose to enhance achievement results?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am a member of the Council which released this report, and we're very pleased to have provided the information that is included in that report. And we are not hiding by it. We're making sure that Nova Scotians and Canadians know the contents of that report, because previous governments have not addressed the needs of students in this province. We're addressing those needs. We have Learning for Life. We're putting 128 new teachers in classrooms in order to address these priorities, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're doing, and we'll continue to do it.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, when is the Minister going to wake up and realize he's been in government for 4 years now? 4 long years, Mr. Speaker. You know, the information about our school system is something that should be made widely available to teachers and parents and principals and school boards, Mr. Speaker. Now, this report tells us that we are below the national average in several key indicators that impact learning, including math specialists that are teaching our students. But the information is not widely available, Mr. Minister. You know that. So my question, Mr. Minister, is, instead of waiting until after the election to act, will the Minister agree to post this report on the department's website and tell Nova Scotians how this information will be used to help our schools and our students?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to having been a member of this government for the last 3.5 years, I spent 30 years in the classrooms of this province, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you that the results that are evident in the test to which the honourable member refers do not occur in a period of 2 to 3 years. They are cumulative results as a result of severe neglect by that crew when they were in charge of this province.
The honourable member for Halifax-Shabukdo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Environment and Labour, also known,
Order,
of course.
please. The member for Halifax-Shabukdo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Environment and Labour, also known as the Minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates. Mr. Speaker, this government's so-called freeze on auto insurance rates will not put an end to the discriminatory practices of insurance companies. No one knows this better than young male drivers in this province. Tony Roding is an example. He's 20 years old, he's living at home to save money and planning to go to university in the fall. But he doesn't live on a bus route and will need a car to get back and forth to school. He is now paying $3,000 to insure a 1998 Accord. If he wanted to have collision coverage, it would cost him $6,000, in spite of his clean driving record. Mr. Speaker, will the minister tell us, when do you plan to stop these discriminatory practices?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, there are some members across the way, I would suggest, that take advantage of people's misfortune for their own political gain. And Mr. Speaker, there are insurance rates in this province which are indeed very high. There are probably some people being discriminated against. Mr. Speaker, what this government is doing is working in a systematic way on a plan that will alleviate those problems.
Now, a member for Halifax-Shabukto on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me link two issues for the Honourable Minister. On top of sky-high tuition fees, high insurance rates are making it nearly impossible for people who live some distance from their post-secondary education institutions to go to school. So Nova Scotians are not only paying the highest tuition fees in the country, they're now paying some of the highest premiums for their auto insurance. Mr. Speaker, Tony Roding has a clean driving record, yet he's paying more than $3,000 for basic coverage. Minister, I'd like you to know that high insurance rates are having a serious impact on the lives of thousands of people in this province. Minister, will you roll back auto insurance rates to help young Nova Scotians like Tony Roding?
Absolutely. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, that gentleman will be helped when we have our new policies in place. And, Mr. Speaker, that will be done all the sooner if they were not filibustering on Bill 45.
The Honourable Member for Halifax-Shabukto on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that answer is jam tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, parents and students are telling us that they can't afford to pay for sky-high tuition and the same time for sky-high insurance premiums. A 65% increase in insurance rates is affecting real lives and preventing young people from pursuing their education. The Canadian Federation of Students says that the insurance rates in Nova Scotia are just an extra barrier for their members. Minister, how do you plan to address this issue?
Thank you very much.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, it's not only students that are affected by the insurance rate increases. It is the whole population, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to resolve that problem.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, parents of students who attended École Beaufort recently had good news that classes may be able to resume there. An alternative use has been found for the facility, which will leave some classroom space for use by the school board. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, Northbrook School is just as empty as it was in 2001 after it was closed by the school board, along with 2 other schools in that community. I'd like to ask the Minister of Education, why can't the same efforts be made to allow classes to resume at Northbrook School?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, a unique set of circumstances presented themselves with respect to École Beaufort. We were able to take advantage of that circumstance, which was precipitated as a result of the needs of the Université Sainte-Anne and the Collège L'Acadie, and as a result of their needs and the availability of that facility, the operation of that facility freed up space which could be used by students who formerly attended that facility.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of the day refused to get involved with the Northbrook School closure. Her inaction forced parents to fundraise some $25,000 to go to court. Unfortunately, they lost and now must pay thousands of dollars in costs to the school board. parents at Ecole Beaufort didn't have to go this route because they have the good fortune to be in a constituency where a cabinet minister faces tough competition in the next election. I would like to ask the Minister of Education why some communities are more important than others when it comes to school closures.
Now, the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is that the situation with respect to Ecole Beaufort was initiated by Université Sainte-Anne and Collège de l'Acadie, and they were looking for space. This was space that was suitable to them. As a result of that space being partially used by that organization, then other space became available, Mr. Speaker, and we were quite happy to facilitate its use.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, for the parents at Northbrook, the story doesn't end there. I would like to table a letter to parents from the school board stating that it will not waive the costs of the legal action to the parents. The letter states, it is important that potential litigants understand that there are risks involved in pursuing litigation, one which is the financial impact of an unsuccessful case. I ask the Minister, since it was your department's inaction that led to this situation, will you now put aside political motives and step in to assist the Northbrook parents?
Now, Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I do not agree with the assumption by the honourable member that there were political motives involved in our decision making.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Tuesday in Houston, the British Columbia government announced it would spend $10 million to ensure oil and gas production off of British Columbia. Mr. Speaker, compare that to our entire energy department, which has a yearly budget of $7 million. And Mr. Speaker, what is worse is that the BC Energy Minister referred to Nova Scotia as a textbook case on how not to develop its offshore industry. I wish to table the Wednesday, May 7th edition of the Halifax Herald, a story by Judy Murden, when she states that Nova Scotia has become a textbook case on how not to develop its offshore, says British Columbia Mines and Energy Minister Richard Neufeld at the largest oil and gas event in the world on Tuesday. That statement was made for all the world to listen to and see in Houston. Mr. Speaker, in 4 years of this Premier, we have lots of spending commitments but little exploration. We have no new projects except for the second tier of Sable. My question to the Premier is, why is the Premier dragging his feet on the offshore file and has become virtually silent on the issue for the past year?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer that to the Acting Minister.
The Acting Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a very good question. I remind the member opposite that in BC there is absolutely no offshore exploration. It hasn't been for some number of decades. In fact, last year at the CORE conference, representatives from the BC government came here to participate in CORE, met with members of my department to talk to me at that time about how Nova Scotia had proceeded. And I would remind the member opposite that we have $1.56 billion worth of exploration commitments, that in excess of $5 billion have been expended in this province by the oil and gas industry. It's a large part of the economy, and we're poised to move forward aggressively.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, those kinds of statements from the acting minister are the reason why he's no longer the Minister of Energy and was taken out of that portfolio. Mr. Speaker, this is the 86th time the Premier has referred a question in this House since we came in here slightly over a month ago. And if I wanted to ask the acting minister a question, I would have asked.
Order. Order, please. Now, Member Cape Breton South has the floor.
The Premier is doing everything he can to avoid the offshore file because he knows it's been a complete failure under his watch. The Premier has gone so far, Mr. Speaker, to say we don't need the offshore for economic development. He's made that statement a number of times, that Nova Scotia will grow with or without the offshore development. He doesn't say how, but that's his statement. My first supplementary to the Premier. Will you, Mr. Premier, take personal responsibility for your failure to generate any new activity in the offshore and take steps to grow the industry instead of giving up on it?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what I can say to the minister opposite, I have great confidence, or to the member opposite, I have great confidence in the Nova Scotia economy. Now, because we do have an economic development policy called Opportunities for Prosperity, I can say with confidence that many sectors of our economy are going to grow in the next couple of decades, and we will do well regardless of the ultimate fortunes of offshore. But what I can say as well to the member opposite, that what we need now in the offshore is successful drilling. We need the discovery of more gas deposits to allow our industry to grow. And we have great confidence that this is going to happen. And what is allowing us to have great confidence is the amount of money that the companies are prepared to put forward in exploration over the next couple of years in our province.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, what Nova Scotians have lost is confidence in this Premier's ability to govern in this province. Mr. Speaker, the Premier failed in the campaign for fairness. He lost the bulk of the Laurentian sub-basin to Newfoundland. Deep Panuke is now in big delay, and now he is hoping this file will quietly be swept under the rug until after the election. My final supplementary to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, how can you, Mr. Premier, explain your inability to see even one new project move forward under your watch?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What the member from Cape Breton South seems to be accusing the government of is being there to blame for the fact that a number of dry wells have been drilled. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, that member knows opposite. What he's trying to do, of course, is fool the public. But if he was able to fool the public, he'd be here and I'd be there.
Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Justice. The Minister knows that on May 28th of this month, Chapter 32 of the Acts of 2002, which lowers the qualifying age for candidates from 19 to 18, will take effect. The Minister also knows that if an election is called one day earlier, thousands of young Nova Scotians who are eligible to vote will not be eligible for nomination. What steps has the Minister taken to ensure that those young voters are eligible to run if an election is called before May 28th?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I'd pass that question to the Premier.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I will guarantee the member opposite that his bill will be irrelevant.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there have been lots of guarantees from this government, many of which have turned out to unfortunately not come to fruition. And I must say, the government showed a great deal of public spirit when it threw its support behind the legislation introduced by the member from Richmond. Without legislation here and now to give it immediate effect, that legislation, young people could be denied the historic opportunity. It would take as much as 5 more years for 18-year-olds to be a candidate in the Nova Scotia election. What steps will the government take to safeguard the newly legislated right for 18-year-old voters in the forthcoming election?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you. I refer that to the Minister.
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Speaker. And the legislation, as you indicated, takes effect later on this month. And the legislation, unless that party has some intent of raising the age again, which they might very well do, or this party over here might raise the age again, that's not on our radar screen.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Perhaps it is that the Minister doesn't understand the issue. The issue is not whether or not the election will be before that date, but whether or not the election will be called before that date. That would deny the right of 18-year-olds that are that this minister and this government said was, quote, long overdue. If the Premier would like to qualify that, then I will again ask the question, will the government cooperate with all sides of this House to pass this bill tomorrow?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I thought I had made myself clear to the member opposite, and this is a serious issue. We believe that 18-year-olds should be able to vote in Nova Scotia, and they will be voting in the next provincial election.
The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. About 3 weeks ago, during estimates, I questioned the Minister on her commitment to recruiting psychiatrists to the Southwest Nova DHA and the Yarmouth Regional Hospital specifically. At that time, the Minister indicated that there is a severe shortage of psychiatrists throughout Nova Scotia as well as in Yarmouth. However, even as today, Mr. Speaker, according to the Department's health recruitment website, the Minister is still attempting to recruit only one psychiatrist. In other areas of the province, the Department is looking for more than one. My first question to the Minister is, why are you still only advertising for one psychiatrist when the region's full complement is 7?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the member raises a problem here in Nova Scotia. He's right. It is a problem in the Pictou County area. It's a problem here, and it's a problem in his area. And Mr. Speaker, I will get back to him on the specifics, but I can say that, Mr. Speaker, one would certainly be a good start. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Clare, and your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister also recently stood in this chamber and indicated that in actual fact we need 12 to 15 additional psychiatrists in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I would dare say that this is a tall order. Again, to the Minister, could the Minister please elaborate on the specific strategy the Department of Health is going to use to recruit 12 to 15 psychiatrists for Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I can certainly speak to part of the strategy. One of the biggest issues with recruiting psychiatrists to Nova Scotia has been the issue of payment and salaries, and our salaries were below what they should have been. There's been a recently negotiated contract with psychiatrists which raises their fees substantially, and we believe that this is one of the ways in which practicing in Nova Scotia will be made more attractive to psychiatrists. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Clare, on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish the Minister well and remind her that Nova Scotians deserve only the best when it comes to healthcare professionals. Given that the Minister has recently announced that she is committed to a uniform set of mental health standards throughout the province, my final question to the Minister is, could the Minister please explain to the professional staff and the mental health unit at the Yarmouth Regional Hospital how she is going to support them until such time as new psychiatrists are recruited for the area?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, in a couple of ways. One way is in that the pilot groups that we've established for young people are these groups of teams of professionals are going to learn more ways in which to help some of the young people who need the help. And with that knowledge, they are going to be able to suggest and project what the needs will be in smaller areas with smaller populations, because they may not need as wide an array of professionals. The other way in which people in that area will be helped is the actual new facility here in Metro. The beds available there will not just be for people from the Metro area, but from around the province. So this will help in some way to alleviate some of the load psychiatrists in other parts of the province are facing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table a letter to the Premier from the Canadian Cancer Society. Executive Director Maureen Summers is asking the Premier to reconsider exempting the casino from smoke-free places bylaws. The Cancer Society argues the government should use its power to support public protection from secondhand smoke instead of caving in to the will of casino operators. I want to ask the Premier, how can you proceed so stubbornly on this exemption given the strong arguments from groups like the Cancer Society?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I refer that to the Minister responsible for the Gaming Corporation to again explain to the member opposite what, in fact, the provision of the Act is.
For Finance.
Speaker, I should point out the member opposite is appearing to inform the House and Nova Scotians that the amendment that we put through basically removes the municipal bylaws. What it actually does, Mr. Speaker, is it is permissive legislation. It allows the government, if in fact that a notice is received by government, to act on it. But I should also point out that we've indicated as a government that we will use the arbitration process that's available to us. Subsequent to that, this is a hypothetical, but it allows us to be responsible, but to exercise every right we have to protect Nova Scotians and also live within the contract that was signed by the previous government with the casino.
Well, member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Handoff number 87, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Physicians for a Smoke-Free Canada, Smoke-Free Nova Scotia, the Lung Association, and now the Cancer Society have all pleaded with this government to listen to reason and to protect workers and visitors at the casino. The letter points out that the Legislative Assembly has power to protect Nova Scotia workers, and it has done so in the past. And, Mr. Speaker, this situation is no different. So again, I would like to ask the Premier, why can't your government use its legislative power as a means of protecting the health of the casino workers instead of a way of watering down municipal bylaws?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And this government takes very seriously the health conditions that affect our working force. We certainly take seriously the health issues that affect the environment how it affects the health issues of Nova Scotians in general. And we have been very progressive in providing a protection not only for workers but Nova Scotians in general from the harm of tobacco smoke. And as a matter of fact, we have the best legislation in Canada.
Honourable member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have chaos around smoke-free legislation in this province because of the faults in this government's smoke-free legislation. Mr. Speaker, this government has repeatedly gone to court to stop the opposition from viewing a few documents. It's moved heaven and earth to pass Bill 68 to bully nurses and other health care workers back to work. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the Premier, why is it you can take decisive action for some issues, but you aren't willing to muster the fortitude to fight on behalf of the health of casino workers?
The Honourable the Premier.
I refer that question to the Minister responsible for the Gaming Corporation.
Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is saying that we're not prepared to challenge the casino. I've indicated in this House, my first answer to this question, that we're prepared to use the process within the contract to bring it forward to a resolution if and when the casino were to put forward a claim. The member opposite doesn't want to listen to the facts, Mr. Speaker. I was very clear. This government introduced anti-smoking legislation, the strongest in the nation, Mr. Speaker. The fact of the matter is that we took the leadership on this. The opposition is trying to make it the appearance that we haven't led the way, Mr. Speaker. Contrary to that, we have.
The Honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Agriculture, Marketing and Fisheries. Mr. Speaker, 2 days ago, representatives from the Turkey Marketing Board appeared before the Resources Committee of the Legislature and expressed concern about marketing of their product. My question to the Minister...
Order, please. The Honourable member for Cape Breton West has the floor.
My question to the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries In view of the fact that his government made a commitment to buy Nova Scotia first, would he outline as to what specific action has been taken to address concerns of the Turkey Marketing Board?
Now, Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. He brings a very good issue to the floor of the House. In terms of turkey marketing and their ability to access, one of the problems and challenges they face is that the large institutions, which would be a purchaser, need larger frozen birds because of the storage issue. In Nova Scotia, we do not have a processing facility, and most of the birds that are being produced are smaller and for the fresh market. So it's a challenge, but we are working with that group to try and address the problem.
Now, Member Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a $25 million a year business for Nova Scotia turkey farmers. They indicated quite explicitly that the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries did nothing to help them in trying to resolve this problem in terms of processing and retailing their product. My question to the Minister is, what is he and his government doing to improve the percentage of Nova Scotia grown turkeys in Nova Scotia store shelves?
Now, Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue he brings forward is one that is a significant challenge. There is no processing facility in this province, and that creates a great deal of difficulty. In fact, the industry estimates that there is excess quota, and there may need to be a rationalization of the amount of turkey being produced in this province to help address the problem.
Now, member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is absolutely incredible to hear the minister say in Nova Scotia has the highest cost per production of any province in Canada. They've complained at committee about increased user fees. They've complained about increased user fees. They complained about not being consulted on the Nova Scotia water strategy. My question to the minister is, what specific action is he going to take to help the Nova Scotia Turkey Marketing Board and the representatives from that organization to market their product and make them a viable entity in this province?
Sure. No, Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department has been working closely with this group to try and address the problem. It has a number of challenges facing it in terms of being able to process within the province, the number of producers, accessing market. We are working with them to try and fix the problem, but there's no magic wand solution in spite of what this member opposite might try to imply.
Now the member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here we sit one more day into a strike by care workers with the Regional Residential Services Society. It's yet another day that this government is turning its back on vulnerable residents and their families. It's another day that the Ham government is thumbing its nose at collective bargaining. I asked the Minister of Community Services, how many more days are you going to allow this strike to continue?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for giving me this opportunity to just sort of go over the collective bargaining process and how it works. In this case, Mr. Speaker, we have an employer, which is RRSS, and we have a union, which is NSGEU Local 66. And they were unable to come to an agreement at the bargaining table, and that's regretful. And we are very concerned about the impact that has on the residents and the families, and we have done all that we can as a government to try to address this. But, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to you that the ball is in the employer and the union's court, as we are not at the bargaining table.
Hear, hear.
Now, member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the government that brought in Bill 68, which still hangs over the healthcare workers in this province. This is a government that will go to any length to protect P3 school operators, the casino, and other big business interests. The same government that has placed enormous stress on the residents and the families because they won't allow RRSS to proceed with binding arbitration. I asked the Minister of Community Services, just what is it about binding arbitration that your government is so afraid of?
Right. Now, Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think, as I've indicated previously, substantial sums have been put into this sector to enhance the wage package, to recognize the valuable care that are given by those workers to the residents. I would also like to point out, Mr. Speaker, and following my previous comments, that in this process we are not one of the parties at the bargaining table. And Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to you that when the decision was made to withdraw services, that it was known by the union that there was no provision for binding arbitration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. Government business, the Honourable Government House Leader. Order, please. The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, in a reply to what I felt was a legitimate question, I believe it was posed by the Leader of the New Democratic Party relative to the bill that he introduced, which were to be an amendment to the Elections Act. I misspoke, and what I should have said was the word run rather than vote. You can go back to Hansard, and I think that will clear up any confusion he might have had with my answer.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Was that then the Premier, just for clarification in his answer, was the Premier then saying is that no election would be called before May 28th because, Mr. Speaker, that's the only way that you could ensure that those who are 18 years of age would be able to be candidates?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the member opposite is extremely intuitive today.
It's not a point of order, but it's obvious clarification of the facts for the House. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm just waiting for the hubbub to die down opposite. Mr. Speaker, would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 45, the Insurance Act?
45, the Honourable Member for Victoria has the floor. He has about 55 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to inform you, I think you're quite generous in giving me 55 minutes. I don't think I'll take that much time of the House. But, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise again and speak on Bill 45. Mr. Speaker, the reason that most of us get on our feet to talk about Bill 45 is because we see so many flaws in it. And we see it as a bill that is not going to help Nova Scotians very much. And Mr. Speaker, in speaking on this bill, it goes without saying that this issue involves one that all of us in the province have an opinion on, since it touches every home and every car driver and every other person who buys insurance for whatever reason. It touches them and it affects them severely. Mr. Speaker, and we are all aware of the stories from Nova Scotians, how their auto insurance rates have risen dramatically in the past year. And as I mentioned on Tuesday, not only car insurance, Mr. Speaker, it's almost anything that's insurable in our province today, be it your home, be it your automobile, be it your farm tractor, or anything, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, this government claims it's committed to protecting consumers in Nova Scotia and ensuring some stability in the automobile insurance market. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's a pretty bold statement, Mr. Speaker. It's a pretty good statement. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't think what the government has done has created any stability in the automobile insurance agency. But, Mr. Speaker, or in the insurance market, more must be done. We must do more in this legislature, and more should have been done. We all know that rising insurance premiums are foremost on the minds of Nova Scotia today. That is probably one of the biggest issues facing Nova Scotians today, Mr. Speaker. And that's why I'm surprised that the Minister doesn't address the issue clearly. Everybody in Nova Scotia is receiving increases, but this insurance amendment may leave many Nova Scotians to turn to the insurer of the last resort, if they can even insure, if they can even afford insurance of any type. We all know what the problem is, but this government hasn't laid out the full solution to the problem facing drivers in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, This freeze in rate increases doesn't prevent insurance companies from not renewing or refusing to do business in the province. There's no way, Mr. Speaker, we can force insurance companies to deal with their clientele. If that's the case, Nova Scotian drivers will be left in a more difficult position now than they were before this amendment was made. This government claims that it has taken a careful, considerate, and well-planned approach to managing the insurance issue for Nova Scotia drivers. But they've had over a year to have a plan. And it's only when things look bad for the Conservative government that, Mr. Speaker, is when they decide that they should do something. And this legislation is the last in this government's list of inactions on this issue. With this legislation, they claim they are putting prevention initiatives in place to what, Mr. Speaker? They say to stabilize costs. And this government says they want input from consumers, business, and the insurance industry on auto insurance reform. Guess what, Mr. Speaker? Why didn't they do that last year? Mr. Speaker, this issue has been on the horizon for 2 years. The government knew this was coming. And if they had nipped it in the bud when they seen it coming, Mr. Speaker, then Nova Scotians would believe that they have some plan, be it ever so small, but at least they would show some concern for Nova Scotians faced with these higher premiums and higher rates. Instead, rates went up last year and this year, and Nova Scotians will have to pay for those higher rates. The cooling off period for rate increases until the reform process comes to a conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's working. We know that the intent of the legislation is to prohibit auto insurance companies from raising their rates, but that doesn't appear to be working, Mr. Speaker. While the legislation for rate increase prohibition is from May 1st, 2003 till January 2004, but those who received rate increases before, will they have to pay, Mr. Speaker? Another thing wrong with this issue is that this Tory government is willing to wait until after an election. After an election, Mr. Speaker, before drafting legislation for the fall sitting of the House. While some Nova Scotians may be impacted by the freeze on rates, one has to question, where are initiatives to deal with those who had increases last winter or even earlier this spring? And what will happen to post-January 2004? Nova Scotians are also questioning why we are seeing this government take action only, Mr. Speaker, until July 2004. Many are concerned with the actions of these insurance companies come January 2nd. Will rates increase so significantly that the freeze that's in place right now won't even cover what customers will have to pay later, after 2004? And, Mr. Speaker, one has to wonder about the timing of this legislation in the House on Monday. There is no question that a pending election call has everything to do with this timing and means very little to this government in how little it impacts people. When all of the Tory candidates knock on the door, they can say, we did something. But, Mr. Speaker, consumers in Nova Scotia are not going to be fooled. Consumers in Nova Scotia are not excited about this amendment. Because, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are smarter than that bunch across the floor. They know how little this measure will help people who paid high insurance rates last year. And they will know that this is not going to help them after January 2004. Mr. Speaker, the people of Nova Scotia expected more from this government. They expect and deserve good insurance coverage, but they also want their coverage, Mr. Speaker, with reasonable premiums. According to StatsCan, Nova Scotia has the second highest insurance rates in the entire country. I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, that the government could have seen this coming. It was on the horizon for years. We as a Liberal Party knew this last year. That's why we asked for an all-party committee to review the issue and take action, or bring some recommendations back to the House, and then the government should have taken action. But alas, the Tories said no, and the NDP also said no. Fast forward 1 year later, and the people are still paying high rates. And this issue that we encouraged our caucus colleagues to take action last year, I think, Mr. Speaker, a lot could have been achieved by an all-party committee. An all-party committee could feel the pulse of Nova Scotians relative to what they felt and where they've seen their insurance rate going. Instead, 1 year later, we have two different parties who have decided that 1 year later we should consult. Mr. Speaker, this is exactly what we told the government and the NDP to do last year. They failed to listen, and the end result is that Nova Scotians still have no relief, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I say that's a shame on both of the parties. Well, we tried our best as a Liberal caucus to engage government and the opposition in an all-party consultation. Our neighbours in New Brunswick and Newfoundland did so. For whatever reason, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, it was politics, or perhaps it was just an issue of one-upmanship in the case of the Tories and the NDP. But, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, who lost, Mr. Speaker? Nova Scotia lost, and they are still losing today. Nova Scotians expect better from their government. They expect action. Mr. Speaker, and consultation with Nova Scotians might have created some action by this government. Now, instead, Nova Scotians will have to wait to the fall if legislation will come forward then. But at least the government is saying legislation will be brought forward in the fall. But, Mr. Speaker, we believe that simply is too late. Mr. Speaker, the people of Nova Scotia elect governments to act, not to procrastinate. And procrastination is exactly what we are seeing from our government. Because of this government's half-baked, half-measure of high rates being frozen and empty regulations, many residents, many rural residents, will have to go without auto insurance. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that there are many drivers out there today that can't afford auto insurance at the high rate. However, maybe there is another reason for this half-baked measure besides the election. Inaction on the part of government also doesn't jeopardize revenues to the government, Mr. Speaker. We all know that. Many would not be aware of the windfall this government is receiving from insurance premiums. Could anyone on that side of the House tell me whether or not the claims of a balanced budget could be made safely because of the 4% tax government collects on insurance premiums? I wonder, can anyone tell us that, Mr. Speaker? In fact, Mr. Speaker, this government received $7 million more than they expected to receive from insurance premiums in the last fiscal year. $7 million more. One has to wonder whether government has become addicted to the increased revenues from insurance tax so much so that to change the system would interrupt these excess revenues. Mr. Speaker, government has done nothing here in Bill 45 but provide a delaying tactic. It has been government inaction that has prolonged the problem. And the problem is prolonged, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss if I didn't address the NDP postcard campaign. Once again, a high-profile campaign without nothing to add in terms of a solution. I guess my definition of consultation and the NDP's definition of consultation is completely different. How can any political party issue a survey with a question being, do you feel your insurance rates are too high? Yes or no? Mr. Speaker, that one would be easy for me to answer. How does this constitute consultation? It doesn't. It doesn't engage people in a process whereby options are made available and people can write back stating the pros and cons of the various options that they might offer. There is nothing more than NDP propaganda, and the people of Nova Scotia can see, Mr. Speaker, they will be able to see right through it. Here's another question of the postcard. If you would disagree with high insurance rate, please tell us. Mr. Speaker, as somebody has